We live in an age of tremendous uncertainty, and we're trying to get a handle on it. We're trying to control our uncertainty, trying to control by using data around us. How do we deal with that? How do we live and get by without going crazy in our business, in our lives, in an age of really an age of uncertainty? And we have today, we're going to discover, how do you deal with that? How can you can you create your own certainty, or do you just learn to live with uncertainty? And how do you deal with that in your business? And today we have Sir David Spiegelhalter with us, an expert in this area, wrote the book, The Art of Uncertainty, which I love the title of your book, David. And David, it's great to have you with us on the Wealth Ability Show. And if you would, give us a little of your background. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm David Spiegelhalter, so I'm Emeritus Professor of Statistics, which is at Cambridge University. So I used to be at the university teaching the students and so on, and doing research and doing lots of other work. I've retired from the university, but still doing lots of stuff, writing books. And I'm also non-executive director of the UK Statistics Authority. So I'm on the board of the National Statistics System for the UK.
Uh, that's awesome. And so you've been talking a lot and studying a lot about uncertainty. You say that uncertainty is getting worse.
I don't know. I mean, people say we are living in really are in an age of uncertainty, and I think there's been some other ages of uncertainty. I think the 1930s was a serious age of uncertainty with an enormous unpredictability about world events, an enormous lack of confidence about what might happen in the world. I don't think we're quite as bad that I should say the early 60s were, round about Kennedy and Cuban Missile Crisis. People were really terrified. But I think now, yeah, there's some, we got some justification to think we are also living in a really quite uncertain world. I think in some way, many ways, compared with how I grew up, I'm a boomer, I was born in the 1950s. In a way, apart from these distant threats of nuclear war, it was a very safe life because things were provided. In the UK, we had a very strong post-war welfare state. There was free education, free healthcare, free everything really, and also growing up in a booming economy with house prices rising and almost choosing which job to have. And I've lived through that my whole life. I've actually been incredibly fortunate, and that's one of the things I got in the book about. Well, I may be jumping ahead slightly, to do with the luck of when you were born in history. I think it's a fascinating thing. It's called constitutive luck. Just what period of time and space and society you happen to be born in. I mean, you had no control of that at all. Out you came, there you were in the world. And for some, it's really good where they pop out into, and for some, it's absolutely terrible where they pop into. So, it's the sort of hand you've been dealt which you have absolutely no choice in, no control over, but which, of course, is enormously influential for the whole of the rest of your life.
Well, and it would seem like, so like you, baby boomer, born in the 50s. And for me, I go, well, life's always been pretty clear, right? I mean, there really hasn't been a lot of uncertainty over the last 40 years. And, but then my son, he's very frustrated. He says, I don't know when I'll be able to afford a home,
Yep.
what work will be like, what my money is going to be like. I mean, he
Yep.
feels, so I actually have a different view of uncertainty than he does.
Yep. Yep.
I think and largely based on, when I was born, like you said.
Yep. I think it's a constitutive luck of being born into a sort of state with a fairly stable society that's growing economically and so on, all these opportunities. And of course, the next generation, is going to be poorer than, my generation. So, and certainly less certainty about job, security, pensions for him, all this stuff. Yeah, no, I think kids today have a tough time of it. And well, what it is actually remarkable, it does demonstrate actually how well they deal with it. People changing jobs every so often, every really quite rapidly.
Yeah.
A lot of personal insecurity, and yet they get on with it. I'm full of admiration because I think my generation had it had it very lucky. That's our constitutive luck as to who we were born. I always think my grandfather, which I talk about in the book, had, of course, had the rather bad constitutive luck of being born in the generation
Right.
just in time to go into the First World War, to go into the
Yep.
trenches. Now, that is not a great time to be born. And, again, he didn't choose that. It's just where he ended up.
So how do you think uncertainty actually affects us as humans? I mean, it's got to change the way we look at how our minds even work.
Oh, enormously, and some people are better at dealing with it than others. I mean, there are it can get to people have different degrees of tolerance of uncertainty, and there are clinical scales where you measure your tolerance of uncertainty, and if you have a very low tolerance of uncertainty, it can actually lead to a clinical diagnosable condition because you just can't bear the doubts about what's going to happen. You want control over everything. You want micro control. You want everything to be absolutely certain the whole time. And of course, that's impossible. And so part of being human, I think a very important part of being human is, first of all, to acknowledge how little, how little control we have over our lives. There's a lot of extent, and to be able to deal with it, to be resilient to it. And that's when I give business talks, I do, corporate talks and things like that. That's actually, I talk about personal stuff, about trying to develop, resilience to uncertainty, and how, of course, that's important in all for organizations as well, for all organizations. There's this lovely concept which I've only really read about recently called safe uncertainty. And it was developed in therapy because therapists found that people were coming towards them in a situation which you might consider unsafe uncertainty. They were anxious, they didn't understand what was going on, they had panic attacks, the world was a mystery, it's chaotic, and they were really unhappy with it. So unsafe uncertainty. And the patients might think, or clients might think, that they could be cured by the therapist. In other words, they could be turned into a situation of safe certainty. I've worked out what the problem is. Everything's sorted out. The world is now, I feel control of the world and I feel very safe. And of course, this is a delusion as what the therapist could actually achieve. They couldn't actually bring people to safe certainty. So the emphasis was shifted, I think very appropriately, to taking clients to safe uncertainty. In other words, you still can't control everything that's going to happen to you. Stuff is still going to happen. However, you may have learned to deal with it. You may have developed that resilience so that all that unpredictability, inevitable, did not upset you, did not make you feel incredibly unsafe. So this idea of safe uncertainty, I think is a really powerful idea. And again, I think it's a powerful idea for organizations because, businesses or anyone like those, you can't control what's going to happen to you, as we're saying, especially in the world at the moment. So you have to be ready to deal with it. And you have to be, rather than being completely upset by the shocks and being put into a panic by what's going on, you have to develop essentially resilience, ways of dealing with it, so that you actually, and if possible, are made even stronger because of those shocks that you're experiencing. But you can't expect to have that uncertainty reduced. You can't avoid it.
Okay, so let's talk about how do you deal with that. And let me give you a specific situation. I'll give you my situation. I'm happy. I'm an open book here. And a couple of years ago, we found that we had a bunch of copycats, and they were out there. And this was not something we were expecting. I mean, we'd been in business for many, many years, never had that situation. All of a sudden, they start popping up. They start using our stuff. It just created this enormous upset in a business. How does a business owner in particular, because they're dealing with, entrepreneurs, we deal with more uncertainty than most people because,
Yeah.
right? Because we literally are trying to, control our business for our customers, for our employees, for ourselves, our families, and all that kind of stuff. So how do you actually learn to either predict that uncertainty or deal with that uncertainty?
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk about that specific organized thing. First of all, I should say that personally, I would be useless at it. I am not an entrepreneur, and I'm really glad I'm not because I don't have the personality for it. I would just go into a state and say, "Oh my God," and run around like a chicken without a head. So this is first. I'm talking about theory. There's a reason I have never had any entrepreneurial activity whatsoever. So I'm really shrewd like that. So I know I know what my limitations are. However, in theory, I I can spout till the cows come home that that since you talk about trying to regain control and being in control, the first thing is you can never be in complete control. So, and you can try to, of course, envisage. I like this word possible futures, all the shocks that can happen, also, which are good things as well. I really love this idea of possible futures, and that requires imagination, something I've got none of. I'm absolutely hopeless. But you do require imagine, and possibly quite almost a malevolent imagine. You didn't think that anyone could be so nasty as that. Oh, that's very naive, frankly. That's very naive. It's just the sort of thing I would do. Just the sort of thing, because I'm hopelessly naive and optimistic, and I never think that the people having bad motivations or anything like that. It just doesn't cross my mind. So you've got to have, a bit of that mindset to do it. And that's also, I like this idea of red teams, which is, I think, fairly standard management thing, that you have a group of people who deliberately trying to think of the nasty stuff, who deliberately try to avoid the groupthink, the agreement, the coziness that you might have developed through success or through stability, who deliberately try to disrupt things. Think, oh, do you realize what could happen? Do you realize there's people trying to do this sort of stuff? So the idea of red team, and actually the people like the UK Ministry of Defence are big proponents of red team mindset, because I think they've clearly had been subject to various disasters where everyone has been very cozy and got into an area of groupthink and all agreed what was going on, and then suddenly something happens that nobody had thought of. And so to try to avoid surprises, you need to be able to think in a slightly more nasty or malevolent way of what the possible things that could be done against you were. And of course, then prepare for them in advance, because if you have at least thought about them, they're on your radar.
True.
They're not going to be the same surprise or same shock. Now, you may not be completely ready. And so that's the idea, in a way, of robustness, of trying to be able to be ready, to be able to recover from things that you've thought of, the list of. That's not enough, though.
Yeah. So you lived in the world of statistics for
Yeah.
most of your professional life, right? And statistics, I remember my statistics classes in college, and it's all about probability. Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you use probability to kind of help deal with uncertainty?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. And that's again because if you can think of possible futures, you can assess probabilities for them. Now, some of those you've got good data. If you're into sports betting or something like that, and which many of my colleagues are, you can build statistical models and you can produce probabilities for the results of matches and things like that. Use them for setting odds and for beating, odds that are being offered to you. So that's absolutely standard way in which, and because you're never predicting the future. The first thing is to get rid of that idea completely. You cannot predict the future. But what you might be able to do is to think of some reasonable odds for the future. And that holds whether you're in sports betting or election forecasting or anything. And in situations where there's quite a lot of data, and with a bit of shrewd, not just the data, but understanding of the situation, you should be able to set some really good odds. And that can be enormously helpful to hedge your bets, either to place bets or to hedge them, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that's what a good hedge fund will be doing as well. They'll be reducing probabilities of future events and therefore using that to assign their trading. So that's absolutely, in a way, standard, algorithmic trading or sports betting or something like that. The problem comes in much more open-ended situations where you can't even list the possibilities. We're into sort of Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, really. The unknown known, that's the known unknowns. All right, that's where you can put probabilities on because you've listed the possibilities. And by using data or judgment, sometimes you can just use judgment, you can put probabilities on things. The problem comes when you can't even list the possibilities. And that's really difficult. And I mean, now, think of the world we're in at the moment. Can you really list all the possibilities of what's going to be happening in the US in 2 years' time? If it gave you a list of questions, you could think of something, but I think you'd have difficulty feeling that you'd completely explored the space of possibilities in your imagination. So this requires particular skill, I think, talent in imagination. again, the UK Ministry of Defence employs science fiction writers. They got some great
Interesting.
write stories about things like. I mean, could you have ever written a story about the last Ukraine drone attack on
Right.
Russia, taking the drones into Russia and launching them from right nearby out of wagons? The top opens up and all these drones shoot out and destroy the aircraft, which they'd purposefully aimed to, get collected together in one place. What a staggering thing! Imagine Russians didn't think of it and they didn't have the imagination to think about it. And it's hardly surprising because think of the imagination you'd need to think about that and to then produce the defense against that. Of course, it's pretty tricky, but it really was a staggering surprise to people.
Yeah. So here we are in a world where data, I mean, it's pretty easy to access data. I mean, 20 years ago, it was much more difficult to access data. But what we have is we have a lot of data that's being interpreted and then presented to us. And I find that a lot of that interpretation is manipulative.
Yep.
So and so I don't trust it. I mean, I'll read something. I'm going, okay, show me where that came from, because I don't trust what your conclusions about the data. There's an the oldest accounting joke. I'm an accountant. The oldest accounting joke in the world is you go to a good accountant, you ask them what's 2 + 2, and a really good accountant, their answer is going to be, well, what would you like it to be?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's, to me, that's really what I got out of my statistics classes, is that, hey, I can manipulate, I can make this look however I want it to look.
Yeah.
So what do you do about that? How do you actually, I mean, if you're not a scientist, you're an expert in this, but most business owners are not. So what do you do to deal with that kind of data manipulation? Hi, everyone. Tom Wheelwright here, CEO of Wealthability and Robert Kiyosaki's personal CPA for over 2 decades. You're listening to The Wealthability Show, where we help entrepreneurs and investors make way more money and pay way less taxes legally. Before we dive in, there are 2 big opportunities I'd like you to know about. First of all, if you're a CPA, join me and Robert Kiyosaki this July 16th, 17th, and 18th in Park City, Utah at the Tax Strategy Conference. Check out the link in the description below. And if you're a business owner who's ready to stop overpaying the IRS and start using the tax law the way the wealthy do, check out the Wealthability Accelerator. Go to wealthability.com/bonus.
Yeah, I regard myself as, as a good statistician. As you said, I can make any number look big or small, frightening or reassuring by the way I tell this, not by lying about the number, just by the context I give it, the framing, give it the story. I can tell it. I can produce any emotional response I think I want from any number. It's just a skill you pick up, partly by watching what other people do and learning from them. So what do we do about that? And I think you're absolutely right. What you should be looking for is trustworthy communication of evidence and numbers. And there's a lot of untrustworthy communication.
Yep.
So what do you look for trustworthy communication? And I think it's incredible. So first of all, people have studied trust, and the first thing you should look at, when I hear a number or a claim, I don't look at the number or the claim. I look at who's telling me this. And, and what you should look for if you want to see whether it's trusted, you want people who are honest, who are competent and reliable. So it's good. Tick those off in your mind: honest, competent, and reliable. Now, people, can be really nice. I've got friends who are honest and competent, but they're so unreliable that I wouldn't trust them to do anything at all. So, because they won't turn up. So, you've got to have all 3. You can't just
I know
have 2
those people.
Yeah, exactly. We all know those sorts of people. So you've got to have all 3. So that's one of the first things, look at the source. And so I don't, when I hear a statistical claim, I don't look at the number. I couldn't care less. And then I ask, why am I hearing this? And so, what is this person trying to, what response is this person or organization trying to arouse in me? Why are they telling me this? This did not arise from nothing. There's a reason this story is being told to me, and generally it's to manipulate my emotions, to make me buy something. You quite often go, "Wow, that's interesting." I mean, you think of social media, you're hearing this stuff purely trying to grab your attention, and it grabs my attention. I mean, I love puppy and duckling videos. They'll grab me just like anything, and then they've grabbed me. Who knows what else I'm going to get up on my feed then? So they know how to do it. So why am I hearing this? Why am I seeing this? And then the really difficult thing is what am I not being told? So, I'm hearing this number, but I'm thinking, how is this being selected? How is it, what's the cherry picking going on here? What else? What am I not hearing? That's the really difficult thing that requires some practice and imagination, and also a deeply suspicious, cynical mind. No, not cynical, skeptical mind, to work out what is this person trying to do? And this is before even looking at the number. Then you can start looking at the number and think, well, do I actually believe it? Are they lying? What definitions are they using and things like that? And then you can look at the claim. Have the number might be right, but the conclusion they're drawing might be deeply biased and unreliable. So, this sounds like hard work, but actually, I think one can get very used to it with a certain degree of skepticism. This is what they should be teaching, and I know are teaching to some extent in schools. Every kid should grow up knowing what the triggers are, how to tear apart a number that they're hearing on the social media or on their news feed or something like that, and to be asking these questions. Is this really a big number? If someone tells me this, eating blueberries decreases my chance of something or other by 8% or something, do I take any notice of that whatsoever, even if it's true, let alone if it isn't true? So I think this is a necessary skill for every citizen in the modern world, because we're being bombarded by the tsunami of rubbish, to put it politely, all the time.
Well, it's really essentially critical thinking, right? And one of the challenges is we have so much coming at us that it's very easy. And I see this. I actually think the baby boomers we have an advantage when it comes to AI and all of this data, because it was harder for us to determine the answer when we were growing up than it is today, right? Today, you get on Chat GPT and here's the answer, right? I mean, it's really simple, or you go to Google. Now, it may not be the right answer, but there
it may not be the right answer, but it's an answer.
Two different things. But my point is that it is this critical thinking, and one of the challenges. So I'm in a profession of skeptics. I mean, see, nobody's more skeptical than the accounting profession. The challenge is, even if it's not you and it's somebody on your team, is having that person. Yes, they'll be a skeptic, but that doesn't mean skeptic means stop. Skeptic means go deeper. Mm-hmm. Right. And that's what I hear you saying, is that you're saying, okay, don't just say, well, I'm skeptical, therefore I don't believe it, therefore I'm done. Yeah. I still need to understand, okay, well, but why? Why are they saying what they're saying? What is their motivation? Where is this coming from? And is there something that I could learn from this that would actually help me with my business?
Exactly, because if skepticism goes into complete cynicism, when you just reject and just say, "Oh no, I don't believe that. I don't believe what those scientists say. I don't believe those politics. I don't believe," then it's really hoping what you're doing is narrowing down to such a narrow and possibly very biased source of information. It's hopeless, and you can see that polarization happening, I think, in US domestic politics, but throughout the world, that social media encourage this polarization where one side is just rules out everything that they hear that they don't like, which is just goodness. So that's why I try to counter that myself, by listening to people I don't agree with, by following people I don't agree with. Try to work out what are they saying, because quite often, because there is something there, even though people I really don't like, think, yeah, I know they have got a point. I can see why they're saying this. I can see why, in fact, why people are believing them or following them is, they're leading them, I think, into an inappropriate direction, but actually they've got a point. Otherwise, people wouldn't take any notice of them. And so you do have to do that. And it's hopeless if you just rule out, all the sources of information you don't like, because you're not going to learn, for a start, and you're not going to ever have anything that could bring nuance or change your mind or anything like that. So I think we do have to try to keep an open mind and keep to a level of skepticism, but not cynicism. so that we do question what we're told, but we don't reject it out of hand.
I like that. It's kind of like people say, well, there's two sides of a coin. I'm going, I think there's actually three, because there is the edge. And
Yeah,
I think I find that the greatest skill is to be able to be on the edge and look at both sides, which
yeah,
is what I'm hearing you say is it's like, so I always want to read both sides of the argument. I don't want to just read the side of the argument I tend to agree with. I want to
yeah,
see
yeah,
what the other side is, because there's a reason that they have that side. And what is that reason? And what am I missing? Because
yeah,
sometimes I go, how can somebody even think that way?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
yet
yeah,
they are thinking that way. And it's
yeah,
not just a small percentage of the population, it could be a large percentage of the
yeah,
population. And why are they thinking that way? Because when I'm thinking about my business, I'm going, okay, well, I have to deal with that,
yeah,
that other
yeah.
thought process, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although I mean the two sides of the coin is quite interesting because I've got one now here. I always carry. This is a beautiful £2 Elizabeth II coin, and it's got two heads on it. So I always carry a two-headed coin. It's illegal, but never mind. Just in case anyone require, I have to flip a coin at any time. It's always useful to have with me. But it's also a good demonstration that I ask people, audiences, well, what's the chance this will come up heads? And they say 50-50. And then after they say, no, it wasn't actually. You trusted me. You trusted me. So all these probabilities you're thinking were based on assumptions and judgments. We have to realize that all these judgments we're making about what might happen and what these probabilities are always based on assumptions and trust and things like that. So we have to be really careful again about sources of information. For example, don't trust me for a start.
Well, let's go to the biggest source of information right now, which is AI.
Yeah.
So that's where everybody's going, whether it's ChatGPT or Perplexity or one of these other AI tools. How do you deal with that? I mean, even if you're saying, well, what's the probability that they're right?
Mm.
How do you deal with those sources of information and whether you do trust them because we're being told that, hey, well, this is the population of information. Of course it's right.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I do is I use it. I tell you, I quite like Claude for some reason. I think because my daughter put me onto it.
Mhm.
That's the
Sure.
Anthropic one, and
Really
I use it all the time. I use it in my work. I use it for writing a book. I use it for just checking things and finding out. I mean, I don't believe it necessarily. And so I feel if it's telling me something important, but it's very good often at scanning a problem, at getting an idea, making a list of stuff. Oh, God, I didn't think of that. And quite good at digging out sources and so on. And even just the Google AI that now comes up automatically on the searches, it can be wrong. But it's just like, I regard it just like, it's almost like a 12-year-old kid who's just read everything, on the internet and then spouts stuff out without actually understanding anything of what they're saying. But they just got this amazing memory and can spout out all this stuff they've absorbed. So then, in a way, they're not trustworthy, but because they make mistakes. But actually, but this is really important. It depends, of course, on the what you call the system prompts. Actually, I feel
right.
they are trying to be honest. They are trying to be balanced. They're doing their best. Now they may be wrong, and they may have got things a bit askew, a bit wrong, and make mistakes and things like that. But at least they're doing their best. They're not actually trying to deliberately manipulate me. But maybe I'm being a bit, naive in that way because it depends on the system prompts. We know what's been put into the system, which will be things like, don't be racist and don't tell people how to make bombs and don't do this, that, and the other. And all this stuff goes in at these overriding prompts at the top. But of course, people could put anything in. You can't find them. They're not going to tell you them. And so it seems to me that's the crucial thing is I would like my AI in the future to quite like somebody to be checking the system prompts that they're not deliberately.
But they're
I,
not biased.
I prefer error than bias in
Right.
a sense. I
Right.
prefer, it's like all statisticians. What do statisticians try to do? They try to find a sample. It may not give the right answer, but what they want is an unbiased sample. That's the crucial thing. Because error you can deal with in a way. You can allow for that and adjust for that, and you've got ways to dealing with it. But bias, if you don't know about it,
Yeah.
messes you up regardless. And so I want systems that can have error in them. But now, even better, of course, will be a system that's not biased and has got some idea of its error rate. So I know that some systems, and people are working this a lot, so that when when a system makes a claim, it'll give some idea of its confidence in the claim. And I know I worked on uncertainty in AI in the 1980s. We thought we had it solved. The first conference on uncertainty in artificial intelligence was in 1986. I contributed to it, for heaven's sakes. It's nearly 40 years ago. Anyway, we thought we'd solved it, but apparently we hadn't. So, because the problems are still there. But they are active problems. And I would also like my system to have some humility and not just to say at the bottom, oh, I make mistakes. Frankly, I don't think that really is 12-year-old. That really is 12-year-old. I would like something that had some humility and some understanding of its limitations.
So you talk about the bias on the input side, basically, but what about your own bias, and how do you deal with that? Because it seems to me like even if I had a completely unbiased, accurate tool, if I don't ask it the right question the right way, I'm going to get an answer that is really not appropriate, and because I'm not really asking a good enough question.
Exactly. So I think actually a really good assistant should also look at the prompts it's being asked and say, you might want to ask this in a different way. I don't think you're exploring it. It would also suggest the prompt. It would have some meta knowledge of what would be a better prompt that could do it. And certainly some of the ways the systems are exploring uncertainty is to, when they're asked given a prompt, deliberately they are, find a range of prompts that are sort of similar but not quite worded the same, and actually generate those themselves and follow those through and see what the range of answers is they get. And that's really nice because it gives you an idea of the sensitivity or the lack of robustness of the answer to how that question was actually asked. Because you want a robust response that isn't so dependent on every single little choice of words you might use. So there's all sorts of developments that I think are going on that will appear in the future and will make this stuff even better to use. I mean, I share anxieties of many people that it can become a little bit too easy to use, and of course it can, become a bit too intelligent, and that's why I'm really interested in the system prompts and I wouldn't say controls on it, but I'm not big on regulating everything, but at least transparency. It's transparency.
Right.
It's like recommendation algorithms on social media. Or misinformation on social media. I can't control it. I can't censor what code people put on YouTube. It's impossible. You can't censor it. However, what you could have is some transparency about what the recommendations algorithms are. Was misinformation, deliberately, which I think essentially that is the outcome of it, being pushed to people because it just generates clicks, it generates attention,
Right.
it generates that period of attention, which is what every algorithm is trying to get.
I like that. I love your idea of having somebody else help you with this. Of course, I'm an advisor, and I think that, sometimes we just can't learn everything. I mean, I'm never going to be a statistician, for example. So I'm never going to be the one to, come up with those probabilities. It's not my profession. I'm your profession. You're really good at that, but you're probably never going to be a tax tax professional or an accountant like I am.
Yeah,
And
but I
so,
taught
this is
them.
where I think we can actually get benefit from, our advisors and the people that we have on our team around us,
Yeah,
so that
can
we
you
have
actually?
other people with different views.
If you're in the UK, I'd now be asking you for some tax advice on VAT. So yeah, we all need help. We all need help. I mean, if you're a doctor, I'd start asking you about my, different problems. So yeah, we all need help, and I help people. I like doing that. And in the end, you want AI to be something, an assistant, an intelligent assistant, but with some humility. You want, good advisors know what they don't know and actually warn you of that and know the limitations of their knowledge and try to make sure that they don't go beyond what they feel confident about. And so that's what you expect from a trustworthy advisor. If you go and talk to somebody, you talk to a doctor, that's what you want. You want him to really do it the best he can, but to admit when he's stumped, in a sense, or where there is real uncertainty and you have got options ahead of you that you might be worth talking to somebody else about or really reflecting on deeper. This is what you would want when you go and see your doctor. Well, that's what I want when I talk to AI.
I love that. I go back to what you said earlier, that you want the person you're getting the information from to be honest, competent, reliable, and you want to understand their motivation. And when you look at an advisor, whether it's a doctor, okay, are they honest? Are they competent? Are they reliable? And what is their motivation? Because you can pretty much tell, is their motivation, I want to help you get better? Or is their motivation, I want to run more tests so that I can make more money, right? Because that could be a different motivation. And so I think those are really four good things: honest, competent, reliable, and motivation. I think that's very practical, and I really appreciate that, David. Again, the book is The Art of Uncertainty: How to Navigate
It's the UK, it's the UK version.
Risk and luck.
I haven't got the US version with me, but that's the UK version.
This is this is absolutely a terrific topic, terrific book. Sir David, it's been fabulous having you on the Wealth Ability Show. And any final words for our audience?
No, it's great fun talking to you, honestly. And next time I would like some tax advice, please. It'd be really easy.
you got, because remember, we do live in uncertainty, and that is the way life is. We can't change that. I think the idea of understanding what's behind information is so important. I think, David, you've really given us some simple tools for that. And because when we do that, what I do know is we'll always make way more money and pay way less tax. We'll see everyone next time. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to the Wealth Ability Show. If today's episode gave you a new perspective, remember this: the tax law is not your enemy. It's a roadmap. And when you know how to follow it, you can build real, lasting wealth. If you're a business owner or investor who's tired of overpaying taxes, the Wealth Ability Accelerator is your next step. You'll have the opportunity to work directly with me for 80% less than my standard rate. And I'll personally guide you through how to change your facts so that you can change your tax. Go to wealthability.com/bonus and apply today. Remember, it's not just what you make, it's what you keep.
This podcast is a presentation of Rich Dad Media Network.